Hello, ladies and gentlemen. It's a Ukrainian talk show on Pod TV. My name is Sasha Star. We have today guests, obviously Dr. Jonathan Lockwood. Welcome to the show, Jonathan.
Oh, thank you. Glad to
And
be
we
here.
have, as always, Ivan Kucherenko from Kyiv, Ukraine. Welcome to the show, Ivan.
Hello, Sasha. Hi, Jonathan. Hi, everyone.
Do you have videos for today's program?
Yeah, we can start with it.
Okay, let's start with the video. We missed this.
Evil must be punished. One unstopped act of terror, one case of abuse left without attention always brings more ruins, more deaths, more tragedies. Unpunished terror sets a precedent. It gives a signal to other terrorists and says, look, I damage and destroy without facing justice, and so can you. With its hands untied, unpunished terror launches a chain reaction of destruction. Terrorist groups produce and exchange weapons, share experience, help withstand sanctions, spread propaganda. The bigger their net is, the harder it is to stop them. The longer the world delays decisive actions or doubts its unity, the bigger is the opportunity for aggressors to restore their resources and prepare to strike back. Right now, we witness the formation of the Axis of Terror: Russia, Iran, North Korea, Hamas, Hezbollah. Russia strikes Ukraine with Iranian-made drones. The Lebanese Hezbollah, which in turn receives help from Syria and Iran, also plans to share its weapons with Russia. After the attack on Israel, Hamas thanked Moscow for its unwavering support. Hamas uses made-in-Russia weapons in Russian online crypto platforms, bypassing sanctions, transferred millions of dollars to terrorists. But we must not be just spectators, because protecting the future of our families, our lives, our nations is our duty. Because inaction is a silent endorsement. Act now, because every day of waiting costs thousands of lives. Evil does not value life, but our priority must be saving people. All countries must collaborate to create a working mechanism against terrorists. Our response should be as clear as day. Call a spade, fight back, strengthen sanctions, prosecute all terrorists and war criminals, and thus prevent the development of inhumane regimes and groups in the future. Terrorists must know that for each their action will come the unconditional and immediate response. You don't close your eyes in hopes evil will disappear. It is not a nightmare, it is a reality. Terrorists cooperate and thus become a powerful force. That is why the democratic world should unite and act more actively. Help people who have been attacked, donate, and raise your voice against terrorism. Let's be clear and decisive.
Very well put.
Thank you. Thank you. Very, very good video. And there's something tells me that this video was not produced in the West, United States, and likewise. I think it was produced in Ukraine. And I'll tell you why I came to that conclusion. Because they are saying that the West should not stop at making sure that the attackers of the free world, the terrorists, should be found and punished. This is where they stand unequivocally. Just there are no doubts about that at all. But that's not reality. That's not where the West is. Absolutely not. The West is for status quo. Okay, here's status quo, for example, that Israel completely controls the situation in the West Bank, in Gaza, and that is, or it was at least recently, that was the status quo. Did it bother the West, United States, or anybody else? No, that's how they live in that region. That's how it's done. Oh, okay. So now comes October 7th. There is a decisive fantastically successful attack, not only from military point of view, but also from political, even much more than that, because they've achieved all their goals. They saw incredible bent in its actually complete purpose of existence of Israel, which is to protect Jewish people around the world. Okay, you can be persecuted in Asia, in Africa. There could be anti-Semitism in Europe or North America, and here is your home country, where you can be saved and you can live and work and so on. No longer. That's no longer the case, because obviously the West will not allow Israel to completely punish the Hamas. Hamas will remain as a political player, at least for now, and then they will resume their, with the help of little friends like Iran and others, they will resume their military might. And so Israel will be taken back 70 years at least from where they were before October 7th. So same thing with Ukraine. It's interesting that Ukraine and Israel are fighting the same enemies. It's 100% the same set of enemies, except that in Ukraine, Russia is the most active one, the terrorist state. And in Israel, there are some other Hamas supported by Iran, by Qatar, by some other actors over there. And where the West is today, again, it's a status quo. Okay, Ukraine. Okay, so Russia got some territory. Okay, what can you evict them from that territory? Realistically speaking, probably not. And if not, then you have to make some arrangement similar to stalemate in Korea between North Korea and South Korea, or do something else, or even. I've heard the comment lately that if you remember the war between Iran and Iraq, there was no winner in that war. Surprisingly, there were heavy losses on both sides, and at the same time, well, it just the war ended one way or another. Somehow they are not fighting anymore. Of course, the tremendous changes happened in both countries, specifically in Iran, but there is no war anymore any longer. So before we'll continue, I need to hear from Ivan. Ivan, please tell me what is exactly situation in Ukraine, in Kiev, what you hear, and be please objective. Don't try to be politically correct or anything like this. Just say exactly what you feel in your head and in your heart.
Thank you, Sasha. Actually, the last days, I'm when I see all this news from the world about the situation around Israel, about the some radical right politicians coming to power in European countries, when they say that any military support of Ukraine should be stopped, that Ukraine have to go to negotiations with Russia to give our people, to give our territories. The more I see such news, the more I want a third world war start in full at last, because I think that this world is actually broken, that people in Western countries, they live in some very warm and some very safe conditions, when they see that when one country brutally attacks another country, that probably it's some kind of fault of that country which was attacked, that Ukraine provoked Russia for this attack, or United States provoked Russia for this attack, or something other, and that there is no one party which is guilty, but both parties are guilty. The victim is guilty and the aggressor is guilty, and this is weird, actually. You've seen all those atrocities which Russia conducted in Ukraine. How Ukraine can be guilty in them? It's like saying when women put on some really nice clothes, and this provoke some bad guys to harm those women, that she is guilty when she put on those clothes. But this is this is really strange and really weird. And now I think that the worst in this situation is that world leaders, world countries, world people of the world, because they vote for those leaders, for those politicians, they don't study from history, because we've seen already the same situation when Nazi Germany, before the Second World War, started to show their aggression. They annexed the territories in Europe, and in order not to provoke the Second World War, and not to go against the Nazi Germany, it was forgiven to them. Actually, it was stated as normal. Okay, you took the Sudets region, and it's now yours. We just don't want another big war to start in Europe, so we will allow Hitler to take this territory. And now we see the same situation. One country which possess the nuclear weapons, and obviously they're a bit more dangerous to the whole world than the Nazi Germany was. They behave like the Nazi Germany just before the Second World War, and no one can stop this country. And we've seen from the history that those efforts actually were not unable to stop the Second World War. And the longer Putin and his government are in power in Russia, the longer they feel that they can survive and they can confront Western countries, confront United States, and they will have nothing to receive in opposite except of some sanctions which are not working in full power, because other countries allow Russia to evade them. This will just make Putin and his government believe that they can actually confront United States and any other NATO and any other Western powers. And I've read recent research from Germany, I think, where the group of analysts stated that any peace negotiations with Russia will allow them to prepare for a next full-scale invasion in 2 or 3 years, because they already put their economy on a military way, and that obviously the target of those invasion will be not Ukraine, but maybe any other country, like one of the Baltic countries. So I think that if this world is not able to stop Putin, to stop Russia in a more radical way, then probably all mechanisms are broken and the world is broken, and maybe the Third World War is a cure for this situation, because on the remnants of countries probably some new architecture of world security will appear like it appeared after the Second World War. So it's like a decade which passed, a decade of peace it passed, and now comes to decade of war. That's what I feel and what I believe.
Thank you, Ivan. And now, Jonathan. Sorry, there is no one except you who can deal with my question. Jonathan, I would like to share my thoughts with you, and hopefully you will agree with at least some of them, and maybe none. It seems to me that Russian history is much more compact and sort of homogeneous from the point of view that, okay, we have leaders. Let's see, we're talking about the Potsdam world, which is now, of course, crashing, as we understand. So we have, say, Stalin, some secondary figures like Khrushchev, some Brezhnev, whatever. And finally, it all goes all the way, forget about Gorbachev and Yeltsin, another two controversial figures. So at least Gorbachev, he will become of not only Russia history, but the world history, absolutely unique figures with all his mistakes and all his problems, but it's exceptional figure. Yeltsin, okay, you can forget about that. And finally, Putin. So Putin is quintessence of modern Russian history, and there is definitely a line from Stalin to Putin, and Putin is very honestly and openly relying on what Stalin did or he didn't, and all this line intact. In the United States of America, it's not so obvious because there were many presidents, very different figures, anywhere from Truman to Eisenhower, and then you go to Reagan, and I'm missing, of course, many of them, and Clinton and Trump, and finally Biden now, and somebody else will be in 2024. Maybe Biden still is very doubtful for many reasons. His age is actually reason number 1, 2, and 3. And in that respect, United States are not strictly followers of the United States doctrines from 1945 through the 50s, 60s, 70s, and so on to the present day, as much as it's in Russia, where it's very straight line, more or less from Stalin to Putin. So the crash of the Potsdam world, it seems to me that Putin did it by design. He felt that there is no reason to keep this Potsdam world, and from the point of view, at least his point of view, was that United States and the West are not going to really fight for two remains of the Potsdam world. To them, okay, there is a Potsdam world, wonderful. There is no Potsdam world. Okay, well, we can live without it at all. So they wouldn't fight for it, or, as they should have done in 1991, replace that with something else. If Potsdam world is no longer working because at least one signatory to that, which is Soviet Union, ceased to exist, so it had to be replaced on purely mechanical reasons with something else, where all the parties, so no longer Soviet Union, so there is Russia, there is Ukraine, Belarus, there is a few other republics, and but somehow nobody was fighting for remains of the Potsdam world, so it's no longer there. So was it a right strategy of US and the West to abandon Potsdam world without replacing it with something else? What do you think?
Well, there I will agree with you that there in Russian strategy or Russian perception from Stalin to Putin, has been one element of continuity: the value and the primacy of possessing nuclear weapons as a means of both have power, great power, prestige, and of potential leverage against the West, particularly the U.S. And so you see this, you do see a straight line from Stalin to Putin of the value, emphasizing the value of development of nuclear weapons as a means of power and leverage. So, and that is what has been driving, or as Putin believes, has been giving him cover to invade Ukraine. So you see that element of continuity. The element of continuity in U.S. strategy during the Cold War was the grand strategy of containment, originally espoused by George Kennan in the 1947 issue of Foreign Affairs. That became the basis of the grand strategy of containment, which both the U.S. Republican and Democratic parties were able to follow consistently. It gave American strategy consistency throughout the Cold War. And as Kennan was essentially correct in that if you contained or prevented Soviet expansionism during the Cold War, that Russia, and by extension the Soviet Union, would inevitably collapse under the internal stresses of its own contradictions, which in fact happened. And so now you have an interesting situation. The Russian strategy is essentially, for lack of a better term, their expression of безопасность, without danger. In order for Russia itself to feel secure, its neighbors and its other adversaries must, by definition, be made to feel insecure. And so the means of doing this is by using its nuclear weapons arsenal as the cover for this. And what's interestingly enough, the reason that the Russians believe this and are very concerned, you can tell it by inference. Very recently, Russian Defense Minister Lavrov has accused the United States of wanting to put weapons in space. Oh my goodness, I wonder why. So potentially, and the U.S. responds, they say, we have a right to defend our satellites and our means of surveillance and so forth. But by extension, this reflects a deeper Russian fear, which I have pointed out before. The one thing, and I will point out the one thing that Russia fears more than anything else, even though they will not publicly admit it directly, they fear the potential of American technology in combination with NATO to neutralize the one thing that makes Russia a great power and gives it leverage: its nuclear weapons arsenal. And if the US and NATO can create this global BMD system that neutralizes nuclear weapons as effective means of leverage and policy, it also, by extension, neutralizes the nuclear arsenals of China, Iran, North Korea, and any other rogue nuclear state that would threaten to use nuclear weapons as a means of leverage against the West. So there are elements of continuity in the Russian perception. Just in the U.S. perception, there is right now a period of transition. The Biden administration is reacting to Russian aggression and recognizing that its interests lie in the defense standing with its NATO partners in opposing Russian aggression in Ukraine. And the other allies are pointing out to the United States that that this is only the beginning. If Russia is allowed to succeed, then other aggressions will follow, and that Russia does not care about the expenditure of its own population in conducting these wars of aggression. Now, on the good side, believe it or not, there is a good side here. Contrary to the expectations of the majority of Western military analysts, there are some analysts that are pointing out that while the Ukrainian counteroffensive has not been showing very visible results in terms of getting back territory, that has not been the objective of the Ukrainian counteroffensive. Is not simply to get back territory. At the strategic level, they have been succeeding. They have driven back the Russian Black Sea Fleet, forced it to withdraw, and they are also coming increasingly closer to cutting the land bridge between Russia and Crimea. And also they have heavily damaged the Kerch Bridge, which is also a means of logistical supply and reinforcement. And these have not been reversed. Russia has not been able to make its logistical and reinforcement lines more secure in the recent months. And it is becoming more likely that in the coming months, as Ukraine continues to acquire weapons that are more accurate, more capable of striking deep into Russian territory and striking at the critical links between Russia and Crimea and Ukraine, that you will see Ukraine emerging with an overall strategic advantage, which will translate itself into success at the operational level. You will see, and as I pointed out before, once that operational victory of severing Russia from Crimea has occurred, and Ukraine is able to commit its strategic reserves into an offensive into Crimea against isolated Russian occupation forces, and Crimea falls back under Ukrainian control, that is a decisive operational defeat for Russia. They will not be able to disguise it. They can't explain it away. They will be forced to they will be compelled to go to the armistice table. I don't call it a negotiation table because the Russians are not going to be negotiating from a standpoint of, wanting to have peace. They will be compelled temporarily to accept a tactical retreat, an operational retreat. And if Ukraine can force this, the NATO General Secretary has talked about wanting to lay the groundwork for having Ukraine join NATO. So that door, and the key to that is Ukrainian operational success on the battlefield. So those are things that you can look at, that you should be paying attention to. And while the Russian strategic perception has been remarkably consistent in terms of their putting a very high value on nuclear weapons possession and development, they are also afraid of the potential of American technology to neutralize that advantage. They have seen indications, the success of Patriot on the battlefield. As I pointed out previously, the Patriot system has scared the Russians since the mid-1980s. They saw it as the leading edge of the Strategic Defense Initiative. In error, they are in error in saying that. But the Raytheon Company has been developing and product improving the Patriot system to an extent which is absolutely remarkable. And the Ukrainians have translated that success into success on the battlefield, a near 100% interception rate, which is phenomenal for a ballistic missile defense system. And if you link that with the potential development of the U.S. Space Force, President Trump declared the existence of the U.S. Space Force, which was a great first step. But it is incomplete in that the U.S. Space Force right now, if you look at open sources, the U.S. Space Force consists of 80 satellites. To the Russians and the Chinese, that is not a Space Force. That is a set of 80 targets that need to be disrupted through counterspace weapons. That is what the Russians and the Chinese are doing at this very moment. They are developing their counterspace weaponry in an effort to potentially nullify, when the time comes, the U.S. advantages in space. And so the U.S., as must be a logical response, must be an asymmetric response, not matching them. You don't develop counterspace weapons to go after their satellites. That does absolutely no good. Instead, what you do is an asymmetric response. You develop a space fleet that can house and contain satellite functions in those orbiting starships, for example, that if we were to buy starships from SpaceX and develop that into a space fleet, if you put satellite functions on starships, any attack on those starships is an automatic act of war. Currently, if you attack a satellite in Earth orbit, the effect is ambiguous because, as one comedian pointed out, satellites do not have mothers.
And it could have been perceived as an accident of some sort.
Yeah, and it can be perceived or explained away as an accident. Mm-hmm. But if you have an orbiting starship that is crewed by Space Force personnel in low Earth orbit, conducting various types of operations for planetary defense, as well as integrating into a global ballistic missile defense, if the Russians or the Chinese attack any one of those starships, that is a clear act of war. That is how the West and the U.S. and its Western allies can impose strategic stability on Earth orbital space, and then by extension, impose stability upon Europe.
Excellent, Jonathan. Thank you so much. Now, Ivan, a question to you. So right now we had excellent talk about the strategic perspective of this war and where it could develop. Now, in more practical terms, right now Russia continues its absolutely incredibly stupid attacks against Avdiivka. That reminds something of a Bakhmut, but with the Bakhmut experience, they should have known better that to take Avdiivka will cost them tens of thousands, if not maybe even 100,000 of lives. Because I'm following the Ukrainian Pravda almost every day, at least 1,000, sometimes many more than that, people, Russian fighters are being killed. And for how long Russia can sustain such losses in their infantry? It's although okay, maybe half of them are former so-called Zeka from jails. But even so, I mean, how many people in jails they have to put up front? I mean, also, it's a very elegant way of cleaning up their jails and preparing much more spaces there.
Yeah, eliminating repeat offenders.
Yeah, that's
Yeah,
good.
I've already heard that the jails, some jails in Russia are closing because there are no prisoners left. They've sent them to Ukraine, and it's something like a very profitable business for Russian government because they will not have to spend money on supporting those prisoners, paying salaries to the officers who works in jails, the police, and they can just can use them as a meat in Ukraine. Yeah, in Avdiivka the situation is crazy because we see the same tactics as it was in Bakhmut, and I also monitor their losses and see that they have much bigger losses in troops than in vehicles. They almost stopped using armored vehicles and tanks there. They just sent those waves of soldiers without any additional support, and they're being killed. We've been talking about a meat grinder in Bakhmut, and now the same meat grinder is in Avdiivka. And how long it will take, nobody knows. But Russian government, they've actually found a motivation for poor Russians with very low. From one side, they have those prisoners, which they can use as free soldiers, and they can forgive them their crimes if they will manage to survive in this meat grinder. And then there is a lot of stories how the rapists, the killers were forgiven, and they came after war in Ukraine and continue commit crimes in Russia again. So this is like a perpetuum mobile. They commit crimes, go to jail. From jail, they go to war in Ukraine. If they survive in those attacks, they're forgiven those crimes. They come back to Russia, commit another crime, go to jail, and then they can.
Yeah, but that's fortunately that is not a perpetually renewable resource. It is an ever diminishing one.
Yeah,
so the quality of the replacements is not going to go up over time. The more that they attempt these offensives, their offensive against Avdiivka reminds me more of Verdun than it does of and Bakhmut and Avdiivka. I'm sorry, I got tangled on that one. But those, sorry, it's a slow week. But in any case, it reminds me. Both of those battles remind me of First World War Verdun. where the intent of the Germans was to bleed the French white, and instead it bled the Germans just about as badly. And the Germans did not attempt another offensive on the Western Front until 1918, after they defeated Russia. But in this case, the Russians are simply feeding, hoping to wear down the Ukrainians. And fortunately, the Ukrainians still hold the strategic initiative. They still have the ability to, with whatever Western aid they're able to get, to take advantage of that and inflict a decisive operational defeat upon Russia. Once that occurs, and in contradiction to the majority of Western military analysts, I'm saying that Ukraine still holds its destiny in its own hands and can still achieve that through a decisive operational defeat. And while the complete defeat of the Black Sea Fleet is certainly attainable, it would not be as decisive as the severance of supplies and reinforcement between Russia and Crimea, and the subsequent reoccupation of Crimea by Ukraine. That will be the decisive element that forces the Russians to negotiate an armistice.
So then, our last question until the end of today's program. I don't understand how the Russians are making a lot of noises about that it's about time to stop the war, it's about time to settle, and so on. And on the other hand, they're throwing thousands and thousands of people to be killed in Avdiivka. How these two strategies can work together? I just don't understand. If they want a peace, then they should try to save the remaining their forces and not to get killed thousands of people a day. Yet they do both things. They're talking about the peace, and they're throwing thousands and thousands of people in a fight. Jonathan,
like Jonathan is saying, they don't need peace. They need peacement in order to prepare and capture not only Avdiivka or the remains parts of Donetsk and Lugansk regions, which they've stated as their goal in these so-called special military operations. They want to capture the entire Ukraine because free Ukraine is eternal enemy for Russia, because Ukrainian nation, prosperous Ukrainian nation, just near the Russian borders, is a threat for any Russian government which consider their own nation as slaves. They don't need Sasha, you've told about that. They are ancestors of Mongols, and there never will be any democratic or any democracy in Russia. They're always being split into the elites, which rule the country, Tsar or chief or some political leaders, and their nation, which they consider as slaves. And this is not a democratic model, and they don't need democratic countries, especially Ukraine, which actually received our democracy in struggles. We've proven that Ukraine is a democratic country in Maidans in 2004, when we were threatened by the presidential elections, which were not really clear, and the result was just drawn, but not the actual one. And
the result was clear to Putin because he already congratulated Yanukovych with.
Yeah. And in 2013, 2014, when Yanukovych just shown that the future of Ukraine, with him being in rule, is with Russia and with Putin, but not with Europe. And that was a really great sign of democracy when people actually rebelled, came on Maidan, and struggled for our own future as a democratic country, but as not a totalitarian one, when your president or your chief in his own way decides how it should be. So and this is a great threat to Russia and to Putin, and that's why they want appeasement to prepare and to conquer the entire Ukraine, not just some parts.
Well, what's happened with this Maidan of 2013 was Yanukovych was elected a couple of years before that on a platform that it will seek acceptance of Ukraine to European Union and possibly NATO, but European Union was a big theme of 2013 uprising, where I think he received a payment from Putin of, I think, $3 billion. And as soon as he received that money, he completely changed the course. There are no longer integration with Europe, so they should be members of ODKB, which is a Russian-led organization with all the stamps and all the other countries. Now, we know what's happened right after that. Now, interesting is that the Finland, which has substantial border with Russia didn't give a damn about Finland joining NATO, because Finland, it was not part of Putin hemisphere of his influence. It was part of the West anyway, so it was non-NATO country. Now it's not a country, it doesn't change anything. Ukraine is completely different thing. Here's a big fight is for the historical continuation of Kievan Rus, because Kievan Rus, even geographically and historically speaking, it's not part of Russia. Russia is actually the Russian. If you remember history, the Russian Tsar. The first ever whoever destroyed Kiev completely was Russian Tsar Andrei Bogolyubsky, who was not even Russian. It was already 50-50 Russian and Polovchanin he was. His face was actually more Asian than Slavic. He was the first one to defeat Kiev, and he burned Kiev. He was the first one ever. So it was, if I remember correctly, 1172 probably, or maybe something close to that. So it was well before Mongols and the Tatars. It was well between when Bogolyubsky, he wanted to prove that being Russian Tsar, you don't necessarily have to be physically in Kiev. But since Kiev's still there, wherever he was in Vladimir or so, and it's nothing compared to Kiev. So he was not perceived as a real Tsar. So he says, okay, I make sure that there will be no longer Kiev. So then people will understand who is real Tsar and where he is. Where I am, that's the capital of Russia. It's not Kiev anymore. So he burned Kiev completely and so on. So the precedent was set between Asian part of Russia, which was then for 250 years absorbed by Mongols and ceased to exist. There was no longer Russia. There were so-called Ulus Juche. Juche was the oldest son of Genghis Khan. So that was Ulus Juche. It was essentially the kingdom of oldest son of the Genghis Khan. That's all what there is. There was nothing Russian. There was absolutely no Russian nation ceased to exist for 250 years. Whereas Kiev, it was also overrun by Mongols on their way to the west, to Poland, to Croatia, to Hungary was completely destroyed at the time and so on. But Kiev was not part of the complete domination of Russia by Mongols, because very soon when Lithuania, and especially after joining the Poland, and they became at least as strong as Tatars and Mongols. Kiev was already in their orbit, and they had nothing to do with Mongols and Tatars, whereas Russia was completely overrun. And whatever the entity that started to be populous in Russia after a battle under Kulikov, and finally until the end of the 15th century, it was not Kievan Rus. It had nothing to do anymore with Kievan Rus. It was completely different country, different people. Everything was different. So Putin wants that today's Russia be exactly have Kievan Rus as its legal and lawful the predecessor. So he wants to have a line, okay, here's Kievan Rus, then there is Moscow, and then Soviet Union, and finally Russia. He wants to have that line, and without Kiev, he has no that. He has
Exactly.
an Indian entity that's from
The existence of an independent and sovereign Ukraine is absolutely antithetical to the goals of Putin and reestablishing what he believes should be the Russian Empire. And so long as you have those two absolutely antithetical goals existing, there can be no negotiated peace between Russia and Ukraine. Russia desires that Ukraine cease to exist. Ukraine desires that Russia stay the heck out of its business, essentially. And those two goals are incompatible. So the only way that this war can end is with the operational defeat of the Russian armed forces and compel, with the aid of the West, and perhaps it will take Ukraine diplomatically dragging the West, kicking and screaming into support of Ukrainian independence and sovereignty, if that's what it takes. It may well take that. But in the meantime, Ukraine still controls its own destiny. It still has the ability to compel Russia to accept an operational defeat. And we have already identified the key.
I'd like to remind you, Ivan, you mentioned this interview from Germany that you read, and Germany now believes that it has 3, maximum 7 years before Russia will invade Germany after taking over the Baltic states, Poland, and wherever else they want to take over. And if you're looking at, because they're not ready right now to fight Russians, they need to produce much more weaponry to face, and they take it from 3 to 7 years, the time required to build really their war economy. So for Germany, the great disappointment would be either resignation of Ukraine or some kind of peace between Russia and Ukraine, because there is no longer 3 to 7 years left. It will be more likely maybe 2 to 5 years, maybe even 1 to 3 years. Who knows what's an equation? At that time, there will be no longer so Germany can relax because it will take so much time for Russia to handle Ukraine. And in the meantime, it's already done. Oh, Germany, where are you? Are you ready to fight us? Not really. Forget about it. Send all this American army out of Germany. We'll talk to you. We'll give you cheap gas. We'll love you, and so on. And so that's kind of a horrible scenario that put in place. Jonathan, what do you think about this?
That would be an absolutely, for NATO to allow such a situation to develop would be equivalent to committing suicide.
It is.
And they cannot afford that. The NATO member nations of NATO recognize the existential danger in allowing Russia to achieve victory in Ukraine. Right now, the probability of Russia being able to achieve operational victory in Ukraine is relatively low because of the stalemate that Ukraine has imposed upon Russian forces and the potential operational defeat which Ukraine is threatening to inflict on Russia in the terms in the Black Sea, as well as severing the land bridge. So Ukraine needs to keep focus, and they need to keep up their diplomatic efforts to keep the Western allies in support of Ukraine. And in parallel with that, the Israeli operation in Gaza against Hamas, that is, again, while the same forces are behind the attack of Hamas into Israel, they must not allow it to become a distraction. Israel must be allowed to exert its sovereign rights of self-defense and suppress and eliminate by whatever means necessary the threat to its existence, because this was something that was initiated by Hamas in order to create a major distraction. And again, Russia has encouraged it, and this is something that, again, both efforts need to be decisively defeated.
Jonathan, if you remember from history, you know the demise of the Roman Empire started when they couldn't handle the German tribes. And that slowly, it took 200-300 years. It didn't happen right away. But after them, they became known all kinds of Vandals and Ostgoths and Westgoths and the Franks, and just name it. And finally, Rome collapsed because they failed to control this territory, like, today's Germany. Don't you think that Israel, by failing to control Gaza and West Bank, is sowing the seeds of its future demise, because these tribes, this Palestinian or Hamas, doesn't matter how you call them, they're numerous. Their women produce 10, 12 children, and if leave them unattended, it's a horrible army in a not too distant future. If we're talking about 10, 12, maybe 20 years from now, we're talking about a strong army in Gaza, and so in West Bank, and the Chiefs can
But
fight.
if you take a look at Gaza, that so-called million-strong army would have a very, very weak logistical base. It would not have any significant outside allies.
Agree, yes. But still, what Russian can say is that they're using now a lot of the tanks, for example, from Second World War, the T-34, the famous tanks. They're still battling today in Ukraine. And they can say to Germans, hey, you forgot T-34. We defeated you in 1945 with T-34 tanks. We can repeat it. We can do it again. Get ready for us. And this would be really a tragedy. So Ukraine today is probably the only force in the world they can really stop Russia, and actually not only stop, but also defeat Russia. And with that, I would like to thank you so much for today's program. And I think we will definitely see, hopefully soon, the defeat of Russia by the hands of Ukraine, or at least to have a certain pause and then defeat Russia, because Russia will never, ever dominate Ukraine. Slava Ukraini. Thank you so much. Thank you. Bye-bye, everybody.